The first time I saw her, she was marching across my newly laid driveway like she owned the earth beneath it. Clipboard in hand, fluorescent pink Crocs, and an attitude that could crack cement. Her name was Debra Whitmore, and she was the self-appointed president of the Oak Crest Meadows HOA, an HOA I wasn't even in. I just moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks earlier. My name's Silas Harper. I bought a house on the very edge of Oak Crest Meadows, technically just outside the association's jurisdiction. The previous owner had made sure to note that in writing, and my real estate lawyer double-checked it. I was free and clear, or so I thought. I was unloading a grill from the back of my truck when she stormed up. "You can't park that eyesore in the driveway," she snapped, pointing at my F-150 like it had insulted her cat. "This is a uniform community and trucks belong in garages." I raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I'm not in the HOA." She flipped through her clipboard, pretending to read something. "All properties on Cedar Elm Court are governed under Oak Crest Meadows. That includes yours." Actually, I pulled the plat maps. My property line cuts off from the HOA border by about 30 feet. "You're mistaken." Debra's face twitched. "We'll see about that." She stormed off. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I got a letter taped to my front door. Not mailed, taped. It was a notice of violation with a fine of $200 for non-compliant lawn edging. The kicker: my lawn hadn't even been edged yet. I hadn't had time. I called the number on the paper. Debra answered. "You're not listening," I said calmly. "I'm not in your HOA." "You are now," she said. "The HOA board voted to annex your home into the community. You're under our rules." "You can't do that without my consent." "We absolutely can," she said, her voice smug. "We have legal documentation." "You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I hung up and called my own. 2 days later, I was served court papers. Debra, on behalf of Oak Crest Meadows Homeowners Association, was suing me for non-compliance and demanded back payments for annual dues I never agreed to. Almost $2,000. Plus late fees. I brought everything to my attorney. When he read the complaint, he actually laughed. "She's trying to annex your property retroactively with no legal standing," he said. "This'll be fun." I didn't laugh. I was already on the hook for legal fees, lost work hours, and a pile of stress. But I was ready to fight, because if Debra wanted a war, she had just picked the wrong neighbor. I stepped into the county records building the next morning, still running on 2 hours of sleep and bitter coffee. My lawyer, Vince Maddox, had already pulled the original neighborhood development agreements, but I wanted to see it for myself. The clerk, a wiry man with half-moon glasses and an encyclopedic memory for zoning codes, slid a yellowing folder across the counter. Last updated 14 years ago. "No annexation approvals since then," he said, tapping the top sheet. "Your property line's here, HOA's ends here, no overlap, no legal claim." I stared at the paper, then took photos from every angle. I wasn't just fighting Debra now, I was building a case. By the time I left, I had copies of the original subdivision plat, the HOA's articles of incorporation, and 3 affidavits from previous homeowners who had refused to join the association. I didn't just have a defense, I had ammunition. On my way home, I noticed a white sedan parked across the street from my house. A woman in the passenger seat held up a smartphone and angled it toward my front yard. The moment I made eye contact, the car peeled away. I walked my property line that afternoon, snapping photographs of every marker, every stake. I even flagged a few boundary points with fluorescent tape. If Debra wanted to play games, I'd make sure the rules were in plain sight. The court hearing was set for the following week, but things escalated faster than I expected. That Thursday, a crew of landscapers showed up unannounced. They started digging up my flower beds with gas-powered edgers, tearing through soil I had just planted. I came out shouting before they could touch the irrigation lines. "Who hired you?" I demanded, pointing at the lead guy. He looked genuinely puzzled. "Work order came from Oak Crest Meadows HOA, said this was common area maintenance." "This isn't common anything," I snapped. "You're trespassing." "Pack it up." They left, but not before leaving a row of gouged sod and a broken sprinkler head. I filed a police report that night. The officer, a young guy named Ruiz, took a look around and asked if I had security footage. "I've got cameras on the porch and garage." "They caught everything." "Send me the footage," he said. "If they cross the property line without permission and cause damage, that's criminal trespass and property destruction, not civil." Ruiz returned the next day with an update. The work order had been submitted under a fake address with Debra's name typed into the authorization box. It wasn't even signed. "She's playing a dangerous game," he said. "If she tries anything else, keep documenting." Saturday morning came with a new surprise. A lien notice duct taped to my mailbox. Not mailed, not notarized, just a sheet of printer paper with the HOA's header and a fake-looking signature. It claimed I owed over $3,000 in unpaid dues and penalties. I took it straight to Vince. "She's not just overreaching," he said. "She's manufacturing debt. That's fraud, Silas. And if she filed this with the county recorder's office, it's a felony." He made a few calls and confirmed that she had tried to submit the document, but the clerk flagged it for missing signatures and inconsistent formatting. Vince filed a motion to dismiss the HOA's lawsuit and added a counterclaim for fraud, harassment, and attempted extortion. That Monday, I noticed something odd. My trash bins hadn't been picked up. Everyone else's had. I walked them down to the end of the street, only to find a laminated sign zip tied to the pole. "Private HOA waste service members only." I called the city sanitation department. They confirmed Oak Crest Meadows had opted out of city waste services years ago, but my home was still on the municipal route. When they checked the records, someone had submitted a cancellation request for my address. I didn't need to ask who. The city reinstated my pickup, apologized, and flagged my account. "We'll require in-person ID verification for any changes going forward," the supervisor told me. "You're not the first person that HOA's messed with." Debra had crossed another line and she wasn't done. That evening, my neighbor, Mr. Tran, knocked on my door. He was a retired Navy engineer who'd lived in the area for 25 years. "She's been going door to door," he said, "telling folks you're a threat to property values, that you're trying to destroy the HOA. I laughed, but he didn't. "She's also pressuring people to sign a petition to formally annex your home. Told them you'd be fined into foreclosure if they didn't." That was the last straw. Vince filed an emergency injunction to stop any further actions by the HOA against me. We included signed statements from Mr. Tran and others Debra had approached. The court date arrived on a windy Wednesday morning. I wore a dark blue suit and brought a binder 3 inches thick. Debra showed up in a leopard print blazer and heels that clicked like gunshots. She was flanked by 2 board members. One looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Meredith Lang entered with a no-nonsense glare. She glanced at the docket, sighed, then looked straight at Debra. "Let's begin with jurisdiction," she said. "Mr. Harper, your counsel has provided extensive documentation. Original plats, recorded property lines, housing covenants. I see no evidence you were ever within the governance of Oak Crest Meadows." Debra shot to her feet. "We voted to include his property last year." "It's in the minutes," Judge Lang raised an eyebrow. "Those minutes are not binding without consent from the homeowner and a legal amendment to your Articles of Incorporation, which you failed to file." Debra opened her mouth, but the judge cut her off. "Furthermore, I reviewed the so-called lien you attempted to record. It was unsigned, unnotarized, and based on a fabricated debt. That constitutes attempted fraud." Vince stood and handed over the police report, the landscaping invoice, and the footage of her fake work order. Judge Lang's jaw tightened. "You ordered unauthorized work on private property causing damage, then tried to bill Mr. Harper for it." "It was for the good of the community," Debra said, her voice shrill. The community's welfare does not give you license to falsify documents, impersonate property owners, or interfere with municipal services. She turned to the clerk. Place the HOA under temporary court supervision. Freeze all enforcement actions until a full audit is conducted. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Debra looked stunned. You can't just, I can, and I am. She turned to me. This isn't over. Judge Lang didn't even look up. It is for you, Mrs. Whitmore. Effective immediately, you are removed from the board of directors pending investigation. Any further actions on behalf of the HOA will result in contempt charges. Vince leaned over and whispered, that might be the fastest implosion I've ever seen. We walked out of that courtroom into a crisp breeze and the smell of fresh pine from the courthouse planters. But I knew this wasn't just a win for me. It was the first domino in a long, overdue reckoning. The courthouse parking lot was nearly empty by the time Vince and I stepped onto the pavement. He was already on the phone with a colleague, requesting a forensic accountant to start digging through Oak Crest Meadows financials. As he spoke, I noticed a beige SUV parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted too dark for legal limits. It lingered for a few minutes, then pulled away as I walked toward it. I memorized the partial plate. Back home, I was greeted by half a dozen neighbors milling around my front yard. They weren't there to complain, they were carrying lawn chairs and soda cans, the unofficial small-town way of offering backup. A woman I hadn't met before introduced herself as Carla, said she lived 2 streets over. You just made a lot of people sleep easier, she said. That woman's been terrorizing folks for years. Most were too scared to push back. A man in a work shirt and camo ball cap nodded. She fined me for having a veteran's flag on my porch, claimed it violated the color scheme. I paid it just to avoid the hassle. Wish I hadn't. I invited them onto the porch while Vince wrapped up his call inside. One by one, they shared stories, threatened liens, denied landscaping requests, even a disabled single mother who'd been forced to remove her wheelchair ramp because it didn't meet visual standards. I wrote down every name and every incident. Vince said the more patterns of misconduct we had, the better our chances of pressing the issue beyond civil court. That night, I heard a soft click outside my bedroom window. I got up and checked the security feed. At 2:15 in the morning, a figure in a hoodie had walked past the side of my house and paused near the garage. They held something up to the security camera, then sprayed it. Static bloomed across the feed. I called Officer Ruiz. He arrived 10 minutes later, flashlight already out, and walked the perimeter with me. The camera lens had been hit with some kind of aerosol paint. He pointed to faint indentations in the grass near the fence. Boot prints. Too big for Debra. Might be someone she hired. He took photos, then looked toward the dark street. I'll file this and request a patrol car to swing past a few times a night. You might want to get a few more cameras higher up this time. By morning, Vince had compiled over 20 statements from residents willing to come forward. He'd also made contact with the county's Property Oversight Board. Apparently, Debra had submitted over a dozen amendments to the HOA's bylaws in the past 3 years, all without resident votes, some with forged signatures. That was enough to trigger a full audit. But the real break came a few days later. A man named Emilio Alvarez showed up at my door. He was a soft-spoken guy in his late 30s with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Said he'd been the HOA's former treasurer until Debra forced him out last year. He had documents, scanned bank statements, email chains, even text messages. She was moving funds into a shell company registered under her nephew's name, he said. Said it was for emergency maintenance reserves, but she was paying for spa retreats, first-class flights, and some custom-built patio set that showed up at her house. Vince arranged for Emilio to meet with a financial crimes investigator downtown. Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office opened a formal probe into Oak Crest Meadows finances. The county sheriff's office served a subpoena on the HOA's main office, which turned out to be a rented P.O. box. The media caught wind shortly after. A local news van parked outside Debra's house the next morning. She tried to chase them off with a broom, which made the evening broadcast. Footage of her red-faced tantrum went viral in the county Facebook group. Comments poured in residents from surrounding neighborhoods sharing eerily similar HOA horror stories. That same week, the judge assigned a special master to oversee the HOA's operations during the investigation. Debra's access to all funds and records was frozen. Her remaining board allies resigned within 2 days, but the real thunderclap came the following Monday when a squad car pulled up to Debra's house just before dawn. 2 detectives and a financial crimes officer walked her out in handcuffs. She was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, falsifying public documents, and criminal trespass. As she was loaded into the back of the cruiser, a small crowd had gathered at the end of the block. No one said a word. Someone just started slow clapping. That afternoon, I received a call from Judge Lang's clerk. A special hearing had been scheduled, one that would determine the future of the HOA itself. The courtroom was packed. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder with residents, some of whom had never stepped foot inside a courthouse before. The judge entered and addressed the room without preamble. The court has reviewed the findings presented by the financial auditor, the statements from over 30 individual homeowners, and the criminal charges currently pending against the former president of Oak Crest Meadows. She paused, then looked directly at the remaining 2 board members seated at the front. This HOA has operated in systemic violation of its own charter. It has enforced illegal fines, falsified legal documents, and misappropriated resident funds. Accordingly, the court orders the immediate dissolution of the Oak Crest Meadows Homeowners Association. Gasps rippled through the room. Some clapped. Others sat in stunned silence. The judge wasn't finished. A court-appointed trustee will manage any remaining financial business, including restitution to affected homeowners. All enforcement authority is revoked effective immediately. This court will not tolerate predatory governance masked as community stewardship. Afterward, Carla approached me in tears. "We're free," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't think we ever would be." Mr. Tran handed me a folded sheet of paper. It was a petition signed by over 60 residents asking if I'd be willing to serve on a new neighborhood council. Not an HOA, just a voluntary group to help coordinate events, maintenance needs, and community support. "No enforcement, no dues, no threats," he said. "We could use someone who knows how to fight." I didn't say yes right away, but I shook his hand. A few days later, crews arrived to repaint the damaged camera housing and replace the sprinkler head the landscapers had destroyed. The costs were covered by restitution funds recovered from Debra's frozen accounts. Her nephew's shell company had been dissolved. The patio set was seized by county deputies and auctioned off. The mailbox that had once held fake fines now carried handwritten notes from neighbors dropping off cookies, tool offers, and invites to backyard barbecues. Even the trash pickup schedule returned to normal. I installed 2 additional cameras, one on the roofline, another on the backyard shed. Not because I expected trouble, but because I understood now, peace wasn't free. It had to be protected. As for Debra, last I heard she was awaiting trial. Her lawyer had issued a brief statement blaming administrative confusion, but no one bought it. Not after the receipts, not after the recordings, and definitely not after the emails where she joked about cracking the whip on those freeloaders. I never set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to barbecue in peace and park my truck in the driveway. But sometimes, standing your ground is all it takes to bring down a bully with a clipboard and a God complex. And when the dust settles, what's left isn't just a quiet yard and a clean record, it's a neighborhood that remembers what it means to stand together. A week after the courtroom exploded with the announcement that Oak Crest Meadows HOA was being dissolved, I received a letter not from the HOA, not from any of its former enforcers, but from the county prosecutor's office. It was short, official, and direct. I was being asked to appear as a witness in the upcoming criminal trial against Debra Whitmore. I set the paper down and exhaled slowly. The war was technically over, but the reckoning had just begun. When I arrived at the prosecutor's office downtown, I was ushered into a conference room with 2 assistant district attorneys and a detective from the county's white-collar crimes unit. The walls were lined with case files exhibits and blown-up images of checks, email printouts, and bank statements. It looked less like a legal prep and more like a battlefield map. They laid it out plainly. Debra had been embezzling funds from the HOA for almost 3 years. She had opened at least 3 separate accounts under the HOA's name, funneling money through them, before transferring it into personal accounts belonging to her relatives. There were spa retreats, sure, but also property purchases, a boat slip lease, and payments made to a consulting firm that didn't exist on any state registry. No one caught it because she controlled the books and refused to let the board audit anything, the lead Ada explained. Everyone assumed she was just strict. No one thought to question where the money was really going. They asked for copies of the video footage I'd taken, the fake lien notice, and the landscaping invoice Debra had fraudulently issued. Every scrap of evidence mattered now, not just to prove the theft, but to establish a pattern of intimidation and fraudulent governance. By that point, Debra had been formally charged with felony embezzlement, forgery, criminal impersonation, and fraud. But the DA was also considering something more serious: racketeering. She used the HOA as a front, the detective said, to control, threaten, and extract money under false pretenses. That's organized criminal activity. If we can prove she ran it like a racket, the penalties escalate. I agreed to testify. In the meantime, the county trustee assigned to wind down the HOA's affairs was hard at work. His name was Harold Clements, a retired judge with the patience of a stone and the memory of a hawk. I met him the next morning at the community center, where he'd scheduled open office hours for residents to file claims for restitution. He shook my hand firmly and gestured to a folding table stacked with envelopes. "You've become something of a folk hero around here," he said without a hint of sarcasm. "If you hadn't stood firm, none of this would have come to light." I looked around. Carla was there, helping sort paperwork. Mr. Tran stood by the coffee pot, chatting with a firefighter who'd been fined 2 years ago for leaving his garage door open too long. "We're not just cleaning up finances," Harold continued. "We're rewriting the story of this neighborhood. People are talking again. They're organizing without fear." He handed me a folder. Inside were the signatures of over 80 residents who wanted the former HOA building a small structure near the tennis courts converted into a public-use community space. No dues, no board, no fines, just a shared resource. I told him I'd help. The criminal trial began a month later. Courtroom security was tight and the gallery was packed. Debra sat at the defense table in a navy suit, her hair pulled tight, jaw set like she was still in charge of something. She refused to look at me when I took the stand. The prosecutor laid out the timeline with brutal clarity. They introduced Emilio's records, the forged work orders, and the surveillance footage. They even brought in a forensic accountant who broke down the shell company transfers in excruciating detail. My testimony came near the end. I walked them through the fake violation notices, the unauthorized landscaping, the late-night camera vandalism. When the prosecutor asked me how I knew Debra was behind it all, I didn't hesitate. "She told me," I said, "over the phone." I recorded it. They played the audio. Debra's voice, sharp and cold, saying, "You're under our rules now, you'll be paying one way or another." Her attorney tried to argue it was metaphorical, that she was speaking in frustration, but no one bought it, not the jury and definitely not the judge. On the 6th day of the trial, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, A seasoned man with a reputation for zero tolerance on fraud delivered the sentence 2 days later. 15 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 8. Mandatory restitution of over $100,000. Court costs. And in a move that brought audible gasps from the gallery, a permanent ban from holding any administrative, financial, or governance position in any housing organization in the state. As the bailiffs led Debra away, she finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were blank, not angry, not regretful, just hollow. Like all her power had evaporated, and she finally realized no one was afraid of her anymore. After the trial, things changed rapidly. The trustee wrapped up the HOA's affairs and distributed restitution checks to residents who had been illegally fined or overcharged. Some people put the money into home repairs. Others donated it to the volunteer fire department or the school library. It wasn't about the cash, it was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from all of us: autonomy. The former HOA office was converted into a shared workshop space. A few retired electricians and carpenters offered free classes on weekends. A community bulletin board went up out front. No one needed a permit to post on it. I took on a small role in the neighborhood council, not as a leader, but as someone who could draft legal documents and explain municipal code when needed. We kept everything transparent. Meetings were open. Decisions were made by consensus. No one ever mentioned the word dues. Late one afternoon, as I was repainting the porch, a kid from down the road rode up on his bike and handed me a flyer. It was for a neighborhood picnic being held in the park the HOA once claimed was for members only. The flyer said, "Everyone welcome." No rules, just ribs. I laughed, thanked him, and said I'd bring coleslaw. That weekend, as the sun dipped low and kids ran between folding tables, I looked around at the people who used to keep their heads down, afraid of letters, fines, and threats. Now they were laughing, playing, living. Mr. Tran raised a plastic cup in my direction. "To neighbors who don't back down," he said. I raised mine in return, because sometimes the line between peace and tyranny is a thin one marked not by fences or bylaws, but by the will of someone willing to say, "No. You don't get to decide." And when that line holds, even against a clipboard-wielding tyrant in fluorescent Crocs, a neighborhood becomes something more than houses and lawns. It becomes a community again, one worth defending.